Hello there, this is Yana Smakula for Papertrey Ink, and thank you for joining me today. Christmas and holiday season is not that far away, so I think it's time to start making holiday cards. Even if you aren't yet starting your holiday card making, I'm hoping the tips I'll share in this video will still be useful to you in your everyday stamping and crafting. In this video, I'll show you how to create a color variation on some of your stamped images with the help of inks, and I'll also share some of my favorite tips for creating thick, chipboard-like, but lightweight die cuts for stamped images. I'm going to start working on my project by stamping a beautiful wreath from the Spring Wreath stamp set. I'm using my Mini Misty stamp positioner as I will be stamping this multiple times to achieve the color variation and desired depth of the color for my image. I picked ripe avocado as the lighter color and olive twist as the darker ink color. I want the top part of my wreath to be lighter and the bottom part of my wreath to be slightly darker. I'm inking the wreath up using both ink pads, using ripe avocado to ink up the top portion and olive twist to ink up the bottom part, and again using ripe avocado to soften the transition between two colors and avoid having harsh lines. I'm repeating stamping these a few times to make sure I get a nice and crisp impression. And here's my wreath all nice and ready. There is a coordinating die available, but it's a solid die. So to perfectly align it on my image, I've already die cut a template. This is just a piece of typing paper. I've die cut the wreath out, and now I'm just using the negative as a guide to help me place my die over my stamped image. By having that guide there, I can be sure my die is going to cut through my stamped image perfectly without even being able to see it. And you can also do this the other way around. You can die cut the paper and do the stamping later when you have solid dies like this, and I actually often prefer that method. But for this wreath, I went with a stamping first. The wreath stamp set also features a number of additional images that you can use to dress the wreath up. There are pine cones and additional branches in various sizes. I wanted to stamp a few of those, cut them out, and use them on my project. Now, to make it easier for me to cut all of these little elements out, I'm going to use a little trick. I have dies, coordinating dies here. I've kept them connected, and this is the main trick here. I've placed them inside my Mini Misty. They face the cut edge down, and I'm now positioning my stamps over the dies. So I'm trying to align coordinating stamps the best I can over the dies. And once I have them in place, I'm going to swing my Misty door, pick the stamps up, remove the die, and stamp images as usual, but I will be stamping them all at once. By doing this, I now have my images positioned in a certain way so that I don't need to spend time aligning each little die over them. I can just align one of my dies, and the rest, since they are connected, should all fall in place. This saves a ton of time, especially when using little images and tiny coordinating dies like these. And if you're mass producing cards, this also saves a lot of time. Or if you need to die cut a lot of similar images or identical images. And by keeping the dies connected, I'm actually also minimizing the risk of losing one of them on my messy desk. If I happen to lose them, I'll lose them all. But since they are connected into a larger piece, it should be much easier to find them. So I've stamped these images a number of times using dark chocolate, ripe avocado, and olive twist inks. I'll have some green pine cones that I won't be using, but stamping my images this way was still faster than stamping and die cutting them one by one. So this is why I ended up stamping a couple of green pine cones. I want to create a background for my card, and for this I'm going to use images from the Wet Paint Holiday Tags stamp set. There are these 3 solid circle sentiments that I really liked, and I'm going to stamp them in soft stone ink to create a subtle background for my wreath. I like to use pattern paper for my projects, but for different kinds of projects, or I should say for different style of cards. When I'm playing with my stamps, I prefer to use them to make just about everything for my project. That being said, you can certainly skip stamping the background and keep your card cleaner and simpler. Or you can use pattern paper instead of stamping. Since I picked out rather large images to create the background, it didn't take a lot of time to stamp. The smaller images you use, the more time it's going to take you to create a background. I started in the center of my paper. I stamped the background directly onto an A2 card front. and worked my way out like I usually do. I knew I wanted to double and even triple stamp these images, so I used my MISTI stamp positioner to help me align these perfectly. And this time I actually used the larger MISTI since I knew I'd be moving the card base in the MISTI. I didn't move the stamps, but I just moved my card base. I also need to stamp one more element to complete my project, and that is a holiday message. I'm using a large Joy from the same wet paint holiday tags stamp set, and I'm stamping it using 2 colors of ink, creating that variation of color that I mentioned earlier, and the one that I did for the wreath too. So here I'm using Pure Poppy, a lighter color, and Scarlet Jewel, a darker color of ink, and again, I'm making the bottom of my image darker and the top part a lot lighter. This stamp also has a coordinating die, so I went ahead and cut it out in my platinum die cutting machine. I am not showing the die cutting process as my die cutting machine is rather large, so it doesn't fit in the video frame. I have it sitting on a second desk next to me, so I need to just turn my chair to cut everything out. I also die cut 3 additional layers using the Joy die. I cut them out of Pure Poppy cardstock. I added scrapbook adhesive's double-sided adhesive sheet to one side of my cardstock to make my die cuts sticky and easier to adhere. Now, you can completely skip this step, but I'm all about the little tiny details, so I wanted to add this barely visible red layer under my die cut. And you can see what it looks like on the finished card in this photo here. Now it's time to assemble the card. Because I love to use foam adhesive to pop my card layers up, I wanted to pop the wreath up as well. I feel that using foam adhesive with different layers helps those layers to stand out and be more visible, more prominently visible on the project. However, I don't want to use foam adhesive. I want to use something more solid. So I'm going to use regular fun foam, and I'm going to cover the front and back of my fun foam with scrapbook adhesive's adhesive sheets. I love to use this product as it's super thin and I never have any problems die cutting it. You might think that your dies won't cut through a piece that is this thick, but they will, especially in this case, since this is not a detailed die. Now, if you don't have this product, if you don't have scrapbook adhesive's adhesive sheets, you can also use stick-it adhesive, or you can use a spray adhesive and just die cut your foam, spray it with spray adhesive, and use that to adhere your die cut pieces together. So here's my foam layer all nice and ready. I'm going to adhere my stamped die cut piece onto the fun foam one, and you can see how this foam adds a nice and even layer of dimension to my wreath. Now you can create the same even layer of dimension by die cutting multiple layers of cardstock and adhering them together. But that will take more time as you will need to die cut multiple layers instead of just one, and that will also make your card a lot heavier. Fun foam is a very light material, so it doesn't add a lot of weight to your project. And this is especially handy if you plan to mail your card. I've also die cut an identical layer for my Joy die cut. I adhered my stamped piece onto the red cardstock layers because I wanted to have a bit of that red show through if you looked at the card from the side. But I also created the fun foam layer to help my Joy die cut lay flat on the card. I have it overlapping the wreath a little bit, so the part that doesn't overlap it needed some support. I die cut another layer of fun foam, cut a part of the letter J off, that's the part that's overlapping the wreath, and use the rest to adhere my die cut Joy onto the card. The rest was very simple. I picked out a few pine cones and branches and arranged them on my wreath, mainly in 3 sections, forming a visual triangle around the Joy. Once I was happy with the placement, I adhered those little die cut pieces using glue and used fun foam for the pine cones. I shaped each wrench with my fingers to make it appear a bit more dimensional, as I didn't want it laying flat on the card. Lastly, to add a little bit of red to this project, I stamped a few stars using the Pure Poppy ink. So here's a closer look at this holiday card. I'd like to encourage you to pull out your stamps, inks, and papers and make an identical or similar projects. So this finishes today's video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope I was able to inspire you to create. I'll see you next time. Bye!